20 alien nobles had collapsed before the princess even spoke. Her uncontrolled power terrified everyone, until one human stepped forward calmly. Princess Solenne Varashi stood behind a shimmering force field, her large galaxy blue eyes watching the scene unfold in front of her. The trial of suitors was an ancient Illyri tradition where eligible bachelors from across the cosmos would present themselves to win her hand in marriage and secure their family's place among the stars. Today, however, only 20 alien nobles had remained standing as Lord Kareth, manipulative advisor to the High King, smirked triumphantly. "See," he whispered to no one in particular. "She's cursed. No man will ever be brave enough to marry her." The Illyri High King slammed his golden staff against the marble floor, making everyone flinch. His voice boomed through the great hall, sending chills down Solenne's spine despite being protected by an invisible barrier. "Is no one here today who is worthy of my daughter?" Silence filled the vast chamber like a thick fog, heavy with tension and fear. The nobles exchanged glances, each one more desperate to escape than the last. Yet before anyone could turn away or flee the arena in shame, a lone figure stepped forward from the crowd. Caleb Morgan's simple explorer's clothes were inconspicuous compared to the opulent robes of Illyri royalty and noble guests. His broad shoulders carried an air of confidence that hadn't wavered even as he walked towards the force field protecting Solenne. He paused, his dark brown eyes locking onto hers for a brief moment before speaking. "I will." Gasps echoed throughout the hall like thunderbolts striking in unison, catching many off guard. The High King's eyebrows shot up. Lord Kareth's smirk turned into a look of disbelief tinged with disdain. Solenne watched Caleb approach her barrier, holding out his hands as if he were inviting an old friend to tea. "I'm not afraid," he said softly yet clearly, enough for the entire hall to hear him. Solenne clutched at the edges of her layered shielding robes, trembling slightly from fear and a strange mix of hope. Her glowing silver hair shone like starlight as she raised her head with difficulty. "Please, don't. Are you afraid he'll hurt you?" Caleb asked gently. She looked down, avoiding his gaze, but not able to conceal the shimmering tears in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. Caleb's lips curved into a small smile that reached his soft brown eyes. He bowed respectfully and held out one hand towards her again. "Then let's prove I can be brave enough for both of us." Confusion mixed with relief crossed Solenne's face, but before she could respond or protest further, the High King interrupted. "Very well, you've passed your first test," he declared loudly over all the murmurs and whispered questions swirling through his courtiers. "Caleb Morgan will stay in our palace for 3 days, 3 nights, and prove himself worthy of my daughter's hand." Solenne glanced at Caleb, her heart racing as she considered what was about to happen. She knew full well how dangerous had been willing to put himself. The nobles who had fallen before didn't collapse from weakness, but were overcome by Solenne's uncontrollable bursts of celestial energy. "Thank you," she murmured softly, when no one else seemed inclined to speak or move just yet. For stepping forward, Caleb nodded, his eyes still locked onto hers with an uncanny understanding and compassion that cut through her fear like a warm breeze on a winter's day. "It's my honor," he replied simply. Sudden realization dawned in Solenne's expression as Caleb began to follow the High King out of the trial hall toward where she would meet him for their stay together. She had been prepared all her life for suitors who might accept this challenge, yet none before now dared take even one step forward. And here was a human wanderer who hadn't hesitated when so many others crumbled at just being in the same room as her. For 3 days and nights he would prove his worthiness, or fail completely. Either way, Solenne couldn't help but feel that something about Caleb Morgan felt different, more real. than any other suitor had ever seemed to be since she was a young princess, with stars in her eyes, dreaming of finding love amidst the chaos created by her own nature. Caleb Morgan's feet crunched on the crystalline gravel path leading to a serene containment garden, where Solenne Verashi stood behind transparent barriers that shimmered like the surface of a starlit pond. Her glowing silver hair cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves, each strand illuminating with its own gentle light, as if reflecting the stars above. The High King approached alongside Caleb and stopped at the entrance to the garden, casting a glance back towards his daughter before turning to address him directly. "Princess Solenne will be staying here for your stay together," he explained in an authoritative tone that left no room for doubt or misunderstanding about how seriously this trial was being taken by both of them. Solenne's gaze darted nervously between the High King and Caleb, her galaxy blue eyes wide with fear. The thought of Caleb entering her space seemed to weigh heavily on her mind as she clutched at the hems of her shielding robes, trying desperately not to show how much this moment terrified her internally. "Your Majesty," Caleb began quietly but firmly, meeting Solenne's gaze directly once more, "could you allow us some time alone?" The High King hesitated, clearly taken aback by such an unusual request from a mere human mediator. His eyebrows knitted together in suspicion before he nodded curtly and stepped back, leaving the two of them standing just beyond the force field separating Solenne's world from Caleb's. As soon as they were left alone, Solenne took a deep breath, her trembling hand reaching up to press against one of the barriers protectively. "Caleb, I don't know how this is going to work," she admitted softly, unable to hide the fear in her voice now that others couldn't hear it. He stepped closer and looked directly into those large galaxy blue eyes again. "I am not here to judge or escape," Caleb said simply, his tone reassuringly calm despite everything they both knew about what he was walking towards. "And I trust you're a person who can be trusted." Solenne's lips quivered slightly as she searched for the right words in return, but found them wanting when faced with such unwavering confidence and gentle regard from someone no one else believed could see past her condition. Her thoughts raced through memories of suitors who had entered this garden before, nobles and aliens alike, all of whom fell prey to fear once they understood what she was capable of. Yet here stood Caleb Morgan, unflinching in the face of an overwhelming force that made others recoil or break down completely out of pure terror. "Come with me," Solenne whispered hesitantly, after a moment's pause. "Let me show you where I can feel safe." She led him around the garden to her personal quarters, located on one side, hidden away from prying eyes and intrusive minds, but still visible through layers of protective force fields meant to keep out intruders and those without mental discipline strong enough not to be overwhelmed by her presence. Solenne paused before entering herself, looking back at Caleb nervously. "Inside will be different," she warned softly. "It's always been this way. No one can ever stay for long." Caleb nodded slowly in understanding, his eyes never wavering from hers, even as he felt the first tendrils of her energy begin to stir around him, whispering gusts that rustled leaves and caused stones nearby to float slightly. He took another step forward until he was within inches of those shimmering barriers again. With deliberate slowness, he raised a hand toward them, but hesitated just before touching instead. His fingers curled gently into fists at his sides, as if ready for something more than contact with the physical world around him here. "Your power isn't dangerous," Caleb spoke now in that soft yet clear voice of his. "It's beautiful." Solenne's breath caught sharply as she stared wide-eyed back up at him, her cheeks flushing a delicate shade of pink under all that starlight freckling her luminous skin from exposure to celestial energy over time. Never had anyone said such words about her before, never dared or believed them enough themselves after witnessing what this condition could do. And yet here stood Caleb Morgan speaking with conviction and belief in something she herself couldn't fully grasp despite living inside it every day of her life. She felt the tremors run through her body now, threatening tears streaming down cheeks from such unexpected kindness, mixed with fear still lingering over whether or not he would actually succeed where so many others had failed utterly. The room began to glow brighter around Solenne as more energy surged forth under this new emotional weight she carried, but couldn't let go completely. Caleb's eyes softened further if possible, and without another word of explanation, his movements, deliberate yet fluid, stepped closer again until he was pressing his palms flat against the berry, or dividing them. "See," he offered with a gentle smile that reached all the way up to those soft brown eyes, looking back into hers now full of understanding. "Still here." Her hands flew to cover her mouth in shock as she watched him stand there calmly, untouched by any visible signs of strain or damage inflicted upon his surroundings due simply from being near enough for some semblance of closeness despite everything isolating between them still remaining intact. It was impossible. It had never happened before. "Why aren't you?" Solenne stuttered weakly after a moment, her eyes wide with disbelief, and perhaps even hope now blooming within the depths of that fear still gripping at heart tightly. Caleb's smile widened just slightly in acknowledgement without needing to explain anything else further, because if there was one thing he understood more than most others about living life fully regardless of obstacles thrown into path, but personal tragedy like losing his home colony or facing impossible odds now set before him by Princess with uncontrollable energy around her, came down to simply choosing not to back away when faced instead. "I'm still here," Caleb repeated softly, and then for the first time since arriving at this palace within force field walled garden area meant specifically as place of solitude and containment, he stepped forward fully through those barriers toward Solenne, now standing just beyond reach, but no longer hiding behind layers separating her from world outside anymore either. As if suddenly breaking free somehow of all fears holding back previously, she reached out tentatively herself once Caleb was inside completely. Her fingers brushed against his sleeve where shielding magic might still exist in place to keep him safe, though clearly it wasn't necessary, as he had already shown through sheer willpower and compassion alone. Their hands met hesitantly at first, then held tightly together after that initial connection established between them. The berry or now nothing more than air around both of their presences. Solenne squeezed his hand gently before releasing it again, looking up into Caleb's eyes with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. You really aren't scared?" she whispered quietly, in wonderment at seeing such raw courage paired equally well alongside heartfelt care shown toward her since arrival here less than an hour ago now. Caleb shook his head lightly. "I wouldn't be brave enough if I didn't see beauty in what others only saw danger." Solenne felt a tear slide down her cheek, but it was one of relief and joy rather than despair or worry over fate uncertain still ahead for both of them together. She took another step closer now until she could lean against Caleb slightly without fear overwhelming him either way. His arm came around naturally, as if instinct guiding even when words needed explaining, beyond simple trust between two beings so different yet finding common ground finally through this shared experience. And Caleb's heart thudded against his ribs as he stepped into the celestial echo chamber, the floor cold and hard beneath his feet. The chamber was a sphere of absolute silence and pure white light, devoid of any visible structure or decoration. yet it hummed with an eerie vibrancy that made even the air feel charged. "Are you ready?" King Vairascha asked from outside the force field barrier, or surrounding Solenne, his voice low but commanding. Caleb nodded without breaking eye contact with Princess Solenne, who stood a few steps away from him, her luminous skin and hair glowing softly in contrast to the white walls around them. Solenne's fingers trembled as she gripped the edge of the shielding robe draped loosely over her shoulders. I don't know what will happen," she whispered, turning those galaxy blue eyes toward Caleb with a mixture of fear and hope. "I'm here for you," he replied quietly, his voice steady despite the knots in his stomach. He moved closer to Solenne, stopping just within arm's reach, but not pressing her too far out of her comfort zone. "We're together." King Vairascha cleared his throat from outside their bubble world. "Princess, when I give you permission, touch him." His tone was firm yet careful. Solenne nodded slightly and took another hesitant step toward Caleb. Her glowing hair seemed to dance around them in soft tendrils, as if it too sensed the tension building between heartbeats of two very different beings standing close, but still separated by invisible barriers, both physical and emotional alike. "You don't have to do this," Solenne said softly, her voice barely audible over the chamber's hum. "If you're scared." Caleb squeezed his hands into fists at his sides. "I'm not." Solenne flinched slightly, but then squared her shoulders. Her eyes met Caleb's again, and she took another step forward until they were close enough that if either of them made a move, there'd be no distance left to bridge. "Why are you doing this?" Solenne asked, her voice trembling now as much from curiosity about the man standing before her as from fear of what might happen next. She stared up at Caleb with large eyes, full of questions unasked, but lingering nonetheless on breaths drawn between them under silent force fields separating yet drawing closer. "Because I want to," he answered softly, his gaze unwavering. "I know it's hard for you." He paused and then added gently, "But that doesn't mean we can't try." Solenne blinked rapidly, a few times, as if trying to clear her mind of all doubts flooding into this moment, when everything felt at once fragile yet full of possibility hanging between them like an unspoken promise. "Will I hurt you?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper, but thick with emotion and uncertainty. Her hands dropped away from the edge of the robe she had been clutching tightly until now, as if releasing some inner tension bound to her grip all along, while reaching instead toward Caleb's sleeve hesitantly where shielding magic should have already kicked in. Caleb watched Solenne's movements carefully, noting how each small gesture seemed laden with invisible weights carried within heart still burdened by fears and doubts, yet finding strength through simple act of reaching out now. He shook his head slowly but surely, without breaking eye contact or wavering under gaze holding so many layers wrapped up inside it like stars floating between night skies. "I would not be brave enough if I didn't see beauty in what others only saw danger," Caleb replied softly, his voice gentle yet filled with conviction that could be felt rather than heard alone. The room around them seemed to hold its breath at the moment, suspended between two hearts beating out of sync yet trying so hard together. Solenne's eyes widened slightly and then softened as she looked up into those soft brown eyes meeting hers without fear or hesitation, only understanding. A tear slipped down her cheek, but it was one born from relief rather than despair, a sign that perhaps some small part of burden carried could start lifting just by having seen such courage embodied in person before. "Will you take my hand?" Solenne asked quietly now, after staring at Caleb with grateful eyes for a long moment, where words seemed insufficient to express everything wrapped up inside her heart and soul, finally finding someone willing to see through barriers erected out of necessity rather than letting them define what could or couldn't be possible between beings so different yet sharing this one fragile connection forged amidst force fields separating more than unifying. Caleb nodded without hesitating, reaching his hand forward cautiously. Their fingertips brushed lightly first, before intertwining their hands fully in a simple gesture that spoke volumes about trust and hope held despite odds seemingly stacked against them, ever finding common ground across gulf of emotions so powerful neither could control alone, let alone combined under magnified amplification chamber set out to test compatibility beyond mere physical presence. "Do it," King Virashi said quietly from outside force field, his voice carrying a mix of caution and expectation. "Let your hearts echo." Solenne squeezed Caleb's hand tightly in response, before letting go slightly again, as if needing momentary pause gather courage, herself now facing uncharted territories ahead marked by amplification tenfold. Caleb noticed Solenne taking deep breaths, trying to steady nerves, while eyes never left him even during brief lapse between words exchanged and actions taken toward each other. He returned her squeeze gently, acknowledging silent message passed without spoken word, but through touch still holding meaning greater than either could express aloud under pressure building around them now. As if suddenly breaking free somehow from all fears previously restraining heart, Solenne reached out tentatively once more, this time fully, extending arm beyond hesitation, until fingers brushed against Caleb's sleeve where shielding magic might exist yet hadn't shown its full extent over her. Her touch was hesitant at first, but then held tightly after initial connection established. Their hands met hesitantly at first, and then held firmly together in simple trust built through shared understanding of obstacles faced despite odds stacked against, finding common ground even under force fields separating more than uniting two hearts now beating as one amidst amplification chamber set out to test compatibility beyond mere physical presence. Solenne squeezed Caleb's hand gently before releasing it again, looking up into his eyes with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. You really aren't scared," she whispered quietly, in wonderment at seeing such raw courage paired equally well alongside heartfelt care shown toward her since arrival here less than an hour ago now. Caleb shook his head lightly. "I wouldn't be brave enough if I didn't see beauty in what others only saw danger." Solenne felt a tear slide down her cheek, but it was one of relief and joy rather than despair or worry over fate uncertain still ahead for both of them together. She took another step closer now until she could lean against Caleb slightly without fear overwhelming him either way. His arm came around naturally, as if instinct guiding even when words needed explaining, beyond simple trust between two beings so different yet finding common ground finally through this shared experience. The air in the chamber seemed to vibrate with a soft golden light that pulsed gently, swirling and blending their emotions together into something beautiful. Solenne's overwhelming loneliness intermingled with Caleb's deep-seated grief over his lost home colony, both colors mixing softly like watercolors on canvas until no sea and glee color dominated, but rather an intricate pattern emerged from the mingling of two souls. "Your heart is so strong," Solenne whispered as she leaned further into Caleb, her head resting against his shoulder. "So brave." Caleb's arm tightened around her slightly, pulling her close in a protective embrace despite the force fields between them. "Yours too," he murmured back, feeling the warmth of her breath on his neck. The observers outside the chamber gasped and whispered amongst themselves at what they were witnessing inside. Even King Virashi's expression softened as he watched through the barriers, his eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and awe. "Impossible," one observer muttered in disbelief. Another nodded solemnly. They stabilize each other. Solenne lifted her head from Caleb's shoulder to look up at him again with those galaxy blue eyes, full of wonderment, now seeing beyond surface fears, hiding true beauty within, heart waiting simply for someone willing, see through layers, protecting against world outside that saw only danger where she found comfort. Caleb's smile widened gently, his gaze never leaving hers. "We can do this," he said quietly but firmly, voice carrying certainty despite odds stacked against them, ever succeeding under conditions set out to test limits beyond endurance. Normal beings face day by day living life within force-fielded confines, separating from world outside, yet finding solace together here under amplified emotional magnification, amplifying bonds formed rather than breaking spirits tested. Solenne nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "With you, I can." Their hands held tightly as they stood there in the chamber, the golden light swirling softly around them like a protective aura, stabilizing their emotions and calming the air around them. The observers outside watched on breathlessly, as if witnessing something sacred unfolding before their very eyes. "Impossible," King Varashi echoed quietly from beyond the barriers, his voice filled with wonder rather than disappointment or doubt, now seeing path forward, not just for Solenne's well-being, but hope thriving despite odds seemingly stacked against two hearts beating out of sync, yet finding common ground amidst force fields separating more than uniting them here. Under amplified emotional magnification chamber set out to test compatibility beyond mere physical presence. And then, as if answering a silent question in their minds, the golden light began to fade gently from around Caleb and Solenne. The air settled into its usual hum of silence and vibrancy, but something had changed inside each observer watching through force-fielded barriers separating them while connecting more than dividing, hearts beating together amidst amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only as place proving compatibility impossible rather than finding it finally under most unlikely circumstances imaginable. The observers whispered amongst themselves in awe. "It worked," one breathed softly. Another nodded, eyes shining with tears of joy and relief. They did the impossible. Outside the barriers, but still within force-fielded confines separating them, yet connecting through shared experience, now unfolding between two hearts beating together amidst amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only as place proving compatibility impossible rather than finding it finally under most unlikely circumstances imaginable. Stood King Varashi watching over with pride mingling alongside amazement at seeing path forward, not just for Solenne's well-being, but hope thriving despite odds seemingly stacked against them, ever succeeding yet finding common ground amidst force fields separating more than uniting two beings so different yet sharing fragile connection forged between amplified emotional magnification, amplifying bonds formed rather than breaking spirits tested. And Caleb Morgan's eyes flickered open as he stirred from a restless sleep, his mind already wandering back to Princess Solenne Varashi and their shared moment of connection in the chamber. Despite everything they had overcome, Caleb felt an unsettling sense of foreboding, a feeling that someone was watching them with ill intentions. "Today is the day, King Varash," he announced as he arrived at the chamber where Caleb and Solenne would face yet another trial, his voice tinged with a mix of pride and solemnity. The High King's gaze flickered between them both, lingering longer on Caleb than usual. "You have done well so far." Solenne looked up from her contemplation, her large galaxy blue eyes reflecting the golden light that shimmered softly around their feet like an ethereal aura. She offered a small smile to Caleb, one full of gratitude and hope. "Thank you," she said gently, her voice barely above a whisper yet clear in the silent chamber, "for everything." Caleb's hand tightened over hers as he nodded back at Solenne. He felt a stirring of warmth within him, not just for his growing bond with Solenne, but also for the way others around them saw what he had seen since their first meeting, her beauty, both internal and external. "Anything to see you smile," Caleb replied softly. "But we have work ahead." King Vairashi nodded again, as if in agreement, then turned away toward the control panels on the far side of the chamber. He began adjusting settings with deft fingers while his aides murmured among themselves worriedly at what lay ahead for their princess and her unlikely protector. "Let's begin," said King Vairashi finally without further explanation. The air grew tense as the golden light around them intensified, pushing boundaries once again to test compatibility beyond physical presence or emotional connection. Caleb took a deep breath, turning back toward Solenne with steady eyes, reflecting his calm demeanor under pressure, no matter how great it seemed outwardly from onlookers witnessing amplified conditions inside force-fielded confines. "Ready?" he asked her quietly yet firmly. Solenne's hands trembled slightly as she nodded, but there was resolve shining through the nervousness in those galaxy-blue depths now staring back at him with such quiet strength despite everything standing between them right then. Here within place meant originally only to prove compatibility, impossible rather than finding it finally, under most unlikely circumstances imaginable. "Ready," she confirmed quietly. Their hands laced together tightly once more as golden light swirled around them like a protective shield against amplified emotional magnification chamber, testing not just their bond, but willpower, standing firm midst all challenges presented thus far yet still remaining unbroken, even here facing ultimate trial, set out to prove compatibility. Impossible rather than finding it finally, under most unlikely circumstances imaginable. "Impossible," King Vairashi breathed from beyond barriers separating him slightly, while connecting more deeply through shared experience, unfolding now between two hearts beating together amidst amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only as place, proving compatibility. Impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for Solenne's well-being, but hope thriving despite odds seemingly stacked against them, ever succeeding yet finding common ground amidst force fields separating more than uniting. Then, unexpectedly, alarms blared loudly through the barriers surrounding them. The golden light faltered ominously before it began swirling faster and brighter than ever, causing the observers to gasp in shock, while King Vairashi's eyes narrowed sharply with suspicion. "What is happening?" Solenne cried out softly but urgently into Caleb's ear, despite her calming presence under amplified conditions meant originally only testing compatibility. Impossible rather than finding path forward finally, under most unlikely circumstances imaginable, yet here seeing heartbreak unfolding amidst ultimate trial, set out to prove bond unworthy of continuation rather than proving strength thriving amid challenges faced thus far. Caleb stepped closer toward Solenne, his grip on her hand tightening reassuringly despite alarms blaring loudly through barriers now separating them slightly, while connecting more deeply through shared experience unfolding between two hearts beating together within amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only as place, proving compatibility. Impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for well-being, but hope thriving amidst force fields separating more than uniting. "Stay calm," Caleb told Solenne firmly, his voice steady despite the alarm. He could sense a disturbance in her energy, stabilizers, a sudden surge of power, unlike anything they had faced before. "Solenne's Kareth," He murmured to himself more than aloud, yet knowing somehow, without needing further explanation, why alarms blaring loudly through barriers separating them slightly while connecting deeply now through shared experience, unfolding between two hearts beating together amidst amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility, impossible rather than finding path forward finally, under most unlikely circumstances imaginable. Solenne's eyes widened in realization. Fear and anger flickering within galaxy blue depths, reflecting golden light swirling faster yet brighter around them as alarms blared loudly throughout barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply through shared experience, unfolding now between two hearts beating together amidst amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only proving compatibility, impossible rather than finding path forward finally, under most unlikely circumstances imaginable. King Varashi's eyes flashed with fury and suspicion, even from beyond barriers separating him slightly yet connected more deeply as he realized what must have happened. "Kareth," he roared, voice filled with a mix of anger and dread at seeing heartbreak unfolding amidst ultimate trial set out to prove bond unworthy of continuation rather than proving strength, thriving amid challenges faced thus far. "Solenne," Caleb said calmly yet urgently, now stepping in front of her protectively, as alarms blaring loudly through barriers separating slightly while connecting more deeply between two hearts beating together amidst amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility, impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for well-being, but hope thriving despite odds seemingly stacked against them ever succeeding. "Breathe," he whispered softly, his hand finding her face gently. She leaned into him, eyes closing briefly, as if seeking solace in the contact, a moment of pure connection amidst amplified conditions meant originally only to test compatibility, impossible rather than finding path forward finally, under most unlikely circumstances imaginable, yet seeing heartbreak unfolding amidst ultimate trial set out to prove bond unworthy of continuation rather than proving strength, thriving amid challenges faced thus far. "It'll keep you safe," Caleb promised her, his voice low and steady despite alarms blaring loudly through barriers separating slightly while connecting more deeply between two hearts beating together with an amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility, impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for well-being, but hope thriving amidst force fields separating more than uniting. Solenne opened her eyes again. Galaxy blue depths reflecting golden light swirling faster and brighter still around them as alarms blaring loudly throughout barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply between two hearts beating together midst amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only proving compatibility, impossible rather than finding path forward finally, under most unlikely circumstances imaginable, yet seeing heartbreak unfolding amidst ultimate trial set out to prove bond unworthy of continuation rather than strength, thriving amid challenges faced thus far. "Caleb," she began, her voice trembling with the effort it took just to breathe through amplified emotional magnification chamber meant originally only testing compatibility, impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for well-being, but hope thriving amidst force fields separating more deeply while connecting between two hearts beating together despite odds seemingly stacked against them ever succeeding under ultimate trial set out to prove bond unworthy of continuation rather than strength, thriving amid challenges faced thus far. "Run," she whispered urgently, her eyes filled with fear yet determination still burning brightly within galaxy blue depths, reflecting golden light swirling faster and brighter around them as alarms blaring loudly through barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply between two hearts beating together amidst amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility, impossible rather than finding path forward finally, under most unlikely circumstances imaginable yet seeing heartbreak unfolding amidst ultimate trial set out to prove bond unworthy of continuation rather than strength, thriving amid challenges faced thus far. Caleb shook his head firmly despite alarms blaring loudly through barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply between two hearts beating together with an amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility, impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for well-being, but hope thriving amidst force fields separating more deeply now as he looked down at Solenne, her beauty shining even brighter under the circumstances, though illuminated by golden light swirling faster and brighter around them. "I'm staying," he said softly but firmly. Then suddenly, an intense burst of energy exploded outward from where Solenne stood, a chaotic whirlwind of celestial power that would have overwhelmed anyone else, instantly fleeing screaming or collapsing in fear. Yet Caleb's calm, unwavering presence seemed to absorb it entirely, like a shield reflecting back any harm intended toward her with an amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility, impossible rather than finding path forward finally, under most unlikely circumstances imaginable yet seeing heartbreak unfolding amidst ultimate trial set out to prove bond unworthy of continuation rather than strength, thriving amid challenges faced thus far. The energy burst froze in mid-air like glittering starlight, suspended as if caught by Caleb's unyielding calm despite alarms blaring loudly through barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply between two hearts beating together with an amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility, impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for well-being, but hope thriving amidst force fields separating more than uniting. "Solenne," he whispered softly, his voice steady and reassuring as golden light swirling faster yet bright around them now reflecting through suspended energy burst caught by Caleb's calm despite alarms blaring loudly throughout barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply between two hearts beating together with an amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility, impossible rather than finding path forward finally, under most unlikely circumstances imaginable yet seeing heartbreak unfolding amidst ultimate trial set out to prove bond unworthy of continuation rather than strength, thriving amid challenges faced thus far. "I'm not going anywhere." Solenne's eyes filled with tears, her galaxy blue depths reflecting golden light swirling faster and brighter around them despite alarms blaring loudly throughout barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply between two hearts beating together amidst amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility, impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for well-being but hope thriving amidst force fields separating more than uniting. She leaned into Caleb, her body trembling with the overwhelming emotion now visible through galaxy blue depths reflecting golden light swirling faster and brighter still around them as alarms blaring loudly throughout barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply between two hearts beating together with an amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility, impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for well-being, but hope thriving amidst force fields separating more than uniting. I can't do this, she whispered brokenly, her voice filled with sorrow and despair despite alarms blaring loudly through barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply between two hearts beating together with an amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility. Impossible yet seeing path forward not just for well-being but hope thriving amidst force fields separating more than uniting. I'm hurting you. Caleb pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her protectively despite alarms blaring loudly throughout barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply between two hearts beating together with an amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility. Impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for well-being, but hope thriving amidst force fields separating more than uniting. No, he said gently, his voice steady and soothing through galaxy blue depths reflecting golden light swirling faster and brighter around them as alarms blaring loudly throughout barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply between two hearts beating together with an amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility. Impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for well-being, but hope thriving amidst force fields separating more than uniting. You're making me stronger. Solenne's body shuddered once more with an overwhelming burst of emotion before suddenly her energy stabilized and the suspended starlight around them melted away like morning dew under golden light swirling faster yet brighter still as alarms blaring loudly through barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply between two hearts beating together with an amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility. Impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for well-being, but hope thriving amidst force fields separating more than uniting. She glowed with a radiant beauty like the sunrise, reflecting golden light swirling faster and brighter around them now under calm protective presence of Caleb despite alarms blaring loudly throughout barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply between two hearts beating together with an amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility. Impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for well-being, but hope thriving amidst force fields separating more than uniting. I love you, Solenne whispered softly, her voice filled with wonder and relief despite alarms blaring loudly through barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply between two hearts beating together with an amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility. Impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for well-being, but hope thriving amidst force fields separating more than uniting. Caleb's breath caught in his throat as golden light swirling faster and brighter around them now reflected galaxy blue depths filled with love, wonder, relief under calm protective presence of Caleb despite alarms blaring loudly throughout barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply between two hearts beating together with an amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility. Impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for well-being but hope thriving amidst force fields separating more than uniting. I know, he replied gently through galaxy blue depths reflecting then light swirling faster and brighter still around them now under calm protective presence of Caleb despite alarms blaring loudly throughout barriers separating slightly while connecting deeply between two hearts beating together with an amplified emotional test chamber meant originally only testing compatibility. Impossible yet seeing path forward, not just for well-being, but hope thriving amidst force fields separating more than uniting. And he'll always be here. The chamber doors hissed open to reveal a gathering of Valeri scholars, their glowing eyes wide in awe and disbelief as they beheld Caleb and Solenne standing at the center, united by an invisible bond that pulsed with serene power. "Your Highness," one scholar approached cautiously, "Lord Kareth has been arrested for attempting to manipulate your emotions against Mr. Morgan." Solenne's gaze shifted from Caleb's calm face to the assembled scholars, her luminous eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and hope. She stepped back slightly into Caleb, who wrapped an arm around her waist in silent reassurance. "Princess Solenne," another scholar began, his voice trembling with reverence, "we have observed Mr. Morgan during your tests. His reactions to your emotional outbursts are unprecedented." "What do you mean?" she asked softly, turning back to the scholars as Caleb's hand tightened comfortingly around her waist. "He does not resist your power," explained a third scholar. "In fact, his heart and mind remain steady, even when exposed to extreme levels of celestial energy, a phenomenon we have never seen before on any Olari." Solenne's fingers twitched nervously at the mention of Lord Kareth, but she held her ground, looking from Caleb back to each concerned face. "May I ask what you observed specifically about Mr. Morgan?" asked another scholar, bowing slightly out of respect for their princess. Caleb cleared his throat softly and turned towards them with a respectful nod. "I noticed something interesting when I first met Solenne," he started in his calm voice. "Whenever she experienced an emotional surge, it felt like being caught between lightning strikes without the usual shock waves." The scholars exchanged glances of surprise before returning their attention to Caleb. "That is remarkable," one scholar said after a moment's silence. "Would you permit us to examine your physiology for signs that could explain this immunity?" Caleb nodded and stepped forward confidently, allowing several Olari doctors to begin running scans through his body using their advanced technology. Solenne watched nervously from behind him as the scanners hummed softly with energy readings. "Princess," a doctor called out suddenly, after examining Caleb closely for some time, "Mr. Morgan's cellular structure produces an unusual field of stability whenever he experiences heightened emotions. It appears to be similar in nature, but oppositely reactive compared to your own bursts." Solenne's eyes widened at this revelation, her fingers gripping the edge of a nearby table tightly as she struggled with conflicting feelings. "But that would mean," Solenne's voice cracked slightly, "Caleb is somehow grounding my power instead of me having uncontrollable outbursts in his presence." "That seems to be exactly what is happening," nodded another scholar. "Could it truly be possible?" she whispered, her eyes shining with a mix of awe and fear. "It would explain why Mr. Morgan remains unaffected by your celestial energy." The doctor's voice was filled with wonder as he adjusted the readings on his scanner. Caleb turned to Solenne gently but firmly, placing both hands on either side of her face, so she had no choice but to meet his eyes. "Solenne," he said quietly yet clearly, "you're not a burden, you're something special that needed someone who listens." The chamber fell silent as realization dawned among the scholars and observers present. Solenne's chest rose sharply with deep breaths while tears welled up in her galaxy blue eyes, reflecting all their emotions back at them. "Mother," she whispered suddenly through clenched teeth, struggling against an overwhelming surge of celestial energy, threatening to overwhelm again due to this revelation. But then something miraculous happened. Caleb placed a hand on either side of her face once more and leaned in close. "Let me take it," he murmured softly into her ear before pulling back just enough for everyone else present to see him give the gentlest nod at Solenne, as if asking permission silently before stepping directly between her energy outburst and any other presence. His calmness was infectious, calming even those watching nearby. This human man stood resolutely against an otherwise uncontrollable force. Scholars quickly backed away from Caleb and Solenne into corners of the chamber as she continued to emit pulses of light, so bright it seemed impossible anyone could withstand them for long without retreating in fear or suffering painful damage. The King stepped forward then, his presence commanding but not aggressive. "Lord Kareth has been exposed," he said loudly yet calmly enough that every single person present could hear clearly over the hum and pulse of energy surrounding Caleb and Solenne still standing together at center stage. "He will be stripped of rank and exiled for attempting to use my daughter's condition against us." Solenne fell to her knees then, overwhelmed by everything happening around her, but more importantly what she now understood about herself through this brave human man who refused to cower in fear. "Caleb," she collapsed into his arms, as the scholars murmured amongst themselves, still awestruck at witnessing such a display of power and compassion together intertwined so tightly. The High King's words echoed throughout the chamber once more. "You are not alone anymore," he addressed Solenne softly yet firmly, over all other voices within their space now hushed into silence for this momentous occasion regarding his daughter specifically, as well as everyone else who stood witness to what just transpired between them both emotionally and physically. "I know," Caleb replied quietly but confidently, lifting her chin gently so she was forced once more to meet his eyes squarely. "You're a miracle that needed someone who listens." And in those words, Solenne found something far greater than mere acceptance, a true understanding of self-worth beyond anything ever conceived before by anyone within the halls and courts here on Alari. In the soft glow of nebulae swirling overhead, Caleb stood beneath the vast dome of Alari's royal observatory. The air hummed with starlight as he gazed up at Solenne, her luminous figure framed by celestial patterns dancing through glass windows like an ethereal vision. "Solenne," Caleb began softly but firmly, turning towards her so no one could miss his sincerity or the steady pulse of determination in his voice. "Do you truly want this marriage, even if your power never fully stabilizes?" The question hung heavy between them for a moment before Solenne's eyes shimmered with unshed tears and starlight freckles that seemed to shift across her glowing skin like tiny comets skimming the surface of distant galaxies. "I don't know," she whispered, voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid even speaking too loudly might trigger another surge. "My people, they've shunned me for so long because I'm different." Caleb reached out then, placing one hand gently on either side of her face with such tenderness that the light around Solenne began to ripple and pulse softly in response like a living thing reacting to his touch. "I don't want the throne," Caleb murmured back into those galaxy blue depths. "I want you, not just because it's expected or duty-bound, but for who you are." His words washed over her like gentle waves of reassurance, breaking through layers of doubt and fear she had longed to dispel yet never dared hope could be possible. "You're breathtaking," Caleb continued softly, as Solenne slowly raised trembling hands to rest against his chest. The fabric beneath them seemed almost ethereal under the glow radiating from where their bodies touched, blending light with warmth in a way that felt both natural and miraculous. "But what if I hurt you?" she asked again, gaze flickering nervously between him and the shielded robes still wrapped tightly around her form, as if afraid to relinquish control even now when it was clear Caleb wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. "What happens then?" Caleb's smile held both affectionate understanding and quiet resolve in equal measure. "Well, face whatever comes together," he replied, wrapping his arms loosely around Solenne's waist, careful not to crowd her, but rather inviting her into a space where she felt safe enough to open up fully. And slowly, with each breath growing deeper and steadier under Caleb's steady gaze filled only with compassion and acceptance. Solenne let go, let the layers of protective fabric fall away piece by piece, until all that remained was herself, beautiful, radiant, vulnerable, and completely enveloped in a warmth she had yearned for her entire life, yet always feared might never truly exist. "I think I can," she murmured almost to herself more than him as Caleb's arms tightened gently around her waist, supporting but not overpowering. The light around them intensified further now, starlight cascading down from Solenne's hair like a waterfall of diamonds, while Caleb's own presence seemed anchored firmly amidst the swirling cosmos surrounding them. They stood there together for what felt like an eternity, just two beings finding their home in each other under skies alive with stars and dreams fulfilled at last, until finally, after much whispered conversation about plans and hopes intertwined so closely now it was hard to tell where one ended or another began, Caleb stepped back slightly then, but kept his eyes locked firmly on Solenne's own as he reached into the pocket of his simple explorer's clothes and pulled out a small box wrapped in soft blue fabric. With trembling fingers, she took hold of its sides carefully before opening it up to reveal an ornate ring made from some kind of unknown alloy that shone like moonlight reflected off silvery rivers under starlit skies. "Solenne," he said solemnly now as her eyes widened with surprise and joy at the sight, "will you marry me? Not because anyone expects it, but simply because I believe in us." Her lips curved upward into a soft smile, so radiant it seemed to cast light of its own across their shared space. "Yes," she whispered back without hesitation, voice barely above breath as tears welled up again, this time not out of fear or loneliness, but sheer happiness. "Yes," Caleb echoed softly before sliding the ring onto her finger, where it glowed faintly against her skin like captured starlight settling into place among galaxies within and without. The light around them pulsed once more, brighter than ever, now infused with a sense of peace and possibility born from mutual trust and affection woven tightly together. They embraced then under streaming nebulae overhead, as if the entire cosmos itself rejoiced at their union, Caleb holding Solenne close while she clung back just as fiercely, yet still with careful awareness not to overpower him either. And for once, amidst all this beauty and wonder surrounding them both, there was no need, only perfect balance, found finally in each other's arms. It wasn't long after that decision under the stars when Caleb led Solenne towards their sanctuary, a secluded waterfall hidden deep within Alaris' lush forests, where starlight fell like rain through shimmering sheets of water cascading over ancient stones. As they approached, she hesitated briefly, eyes wide with both excitement and apprehension. "This is," she trailed off softly, looking around at the glowing waters framed by vibrant plant life that seemed almost to sparkle in response to their presence here among nature's splendor. "Yes," Caleb replied gently, catching her hand again as if sensing hesitation. "This feels right." And so together they ascended up narrow stone steps carved into a cliff face until reaching what appeared at first glance like any ordinary waterfall sanctuary, until one looked closer and noticed how the falls themselves seemed to glow from within, water sparkling with stardust as it tumbled down over smooth rocks. Solenne's eyes were wide now, not just from beauty of sight, but something deeper reflecting back through galaxy blue irises shimmering ever so slightly. She paused momentarily before turning to Caleb once more, her voice barely audible above sound of cascading waters behind them, yet carrying undeniable weight within its soft tones. "You truly wish for this?" Caleb met those galaxy blue eyes with unwavering sincerity, then, and simply nodded, giving no verbal reply needed, because actions spoke louder than words here amidst wonders. Without another word or hesitation, Solenne slipped out of her final layer of shielding robes, until all that remained was just herself, beautifully radiant under natural light streaming through trees surrounding them. Caleb's breath caught in throat momentarily at sight, but quickly recovered, reaching forward instead with both hands open, palms up, offering reassurance as well invitation. "You're breathtaking," he whispered almost reverently once more before wrapping arms carefully around Solenne finally, allowing full embrace for first time without barriers between hearts or minds, only two souls finding home amidst celestial splendor enveloping them both. Her body relaxed into his now fully under sky filled with streaming starlight falling like diamonds through cascading waters, every touch bringing out spark of pure light, glowing brighter still as Caleb held her closer, letting warmth seep from him directly towards Solenne, filling gaps left empty far too long. Underneath falls of water glinting brilliantly against backdrop of vibrant greens and silvers around them, they stood together, sharing moment none thought possible until now, hearts beating in rhythm with each other's pulse under canopy glowing stars above. And it was within this sanctuary where Caleb took Solenne's hand again, gently sliding wedding band onto finger, causing light itself to shimmer brighter still. "Now," he murmured softly, looking into eyes shining bright like galaxies, knowing nothing else mattered more than standing here together, sharing miracle found at last amidst wonders of universe surrounding them both. And so under waterfalls sparkling with stardust falling from heavens above down over smooth rocks beneath feet, Caleb Morgan and Princess Solenne Verashi made their vows to one another, their words spoken not aloud, but through touch and gaze, becoming promises carved into souls rather than air or paper. As they embraced fully now, without barriers between hearts or minds, only two souls finding home amid celestial splendor enveloping them both. For the first time ever, Solenne felt truly seen, not judged for difference, nor feared because of power, instead accepted wholly and loved unconditionally. And in Caleb's arms, under waterfalls glittering like starlight cascading down around them, she knew beyond any shadow doubt this was her forever home place, where light within shone brightest outside to finally allowed full expression without fear or constraint. "You're breathtaking," Caleb whispered once more into galaxy blue depths, as they stood there together, letting everything else fade away, leaving only wonder of moments shared amidst miracles happening beneath falling starlight. End.